Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's Community Grants Program Workshop here at the Denver Foundation. My name is Mara Kelly. I'm the Senior Director of Engaged Philanthropy, and I help to manage with our amazing Engaged Philanthropy team, help to manage the Community Grants Program. Just want to welcome you for joining us this morning. We're so glad to have you here. I want to start today with a little update on our communication support, just to make sure that everybody here has a chance to engage equally with our workshop today. First of all, you can choose to turn on closed captioning. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see that CC icon. Just go ahead and click that if you want to turn the CC on. And also, we are today providing Spanish language and American Sign Language translation. Thank you to the Community Language Cooperative for your support today and for all the work you do supporting the Denver community. As many of you know, the Community Grants Program is one facet of our work at the Denver Foundation to support our community's greatest needs. And I want to thank each of you for being on the call today. And thank you for the crucial work you do to support our community. We're really excited to share with you today more about our Community Grants Program, about the Denver Foundation's values, and our approach to grant making. The Community Grants Program application and our application portal logistics, we'll be going over all of this today, along with our priority areas and how we approach this grant making process. We'll leave plenty of time at the end for your questions, which I know you'll want to get in. Your presenters today will be Sachi Ashita, who's the Director of Operational Excellence here at the Denver Foundation, and Desa West, our Chief Impact Officer. There's no need to write down notes feverishly as you go through this. The session will be recorded, and that will be shared with you and posted on our website. And we also want to make sure that you'll be able to put your questions into the Q&A section during the discussion. Please know that in addition to this session, the Foundation's staff will also be available. If you have further questions, you can reach out to us at our address, grants@denverfoundation.org. We'll go over that more at the end. But now I think it is my deep pleasure to turn it over to my colleague, Desa West, again, who's our Chief Impact Officer at the Denver Foundation. Thanks again for joining us this morning. And thank you, Desa. Welcome.
Thanks, Mara, and hello, everyone. It's great to see you. Welcome again to the workshop, and we'll look forward to diving in. Just a quick note before we start, I'm dealing with a little bit of COVID, so if I get interrupted by a coughing fit, just bear with me. I'll get back on track right away. So we can go to the first slide. So the Community Grants Program is a really important part of the Denver Foundation's grant-making services. It's comes from the Foundation's private endowment. That means these dollars are entirely discretionary to the Denver Foundation. So they're one of the few funding sources that don't have a direct connection to individual donor giving in the Denver Foundation's grant-making universe. And the priorities are based on feedback that we collected from the community. We go through a process every several years of refreshing our strategic framework. And the priorities that you see today really come from the feedback of over 8,000 data points that we collected from community in our last major community listening session. It's a relatively modest portion of the Foundation's grant making. It makes up about 5% of the Foundation's grants. It's about $4 million a year. And grants range from $20,000 to $50,000. So when you're thinking about making your ask, that's the range that you're going to want to ask within. The due date for this cycle is August 1st. So keep that in mind as you're putting your application together. We fund in 5 different priority areas. The first is economic opportunity. And we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail, but I'll just touch on them all now. So the first is economic opportunity with a focus on community wealth building. So things like cooperatives, employee stock ownership programs, starting small businesses, as well as workforce development. Education with a focus on K-12 public education reforms, particularly relating to racial equity, as well as school funding. environment and climate with a focus on energy efficiency, renewable energy, and air quality. Housing and homelessness with a focus on affordable housing, as well as people who are unhoused. And then transportation with a focus on public transit accessibility and affordability. So for education, as I mentioned, we're really focused on programs that are designed to really change the face of the school system as it relates to racial equity. So we're looking for programs that are happening during the school day that are making changes in the school itself. So supplemental after-school programs are not considered for this education area. Mentoring is not something that is funded in this area. And it does not include early childhood education. The focus is really on K-12 education reform. Again, the focus is not on private schools, it's on public schools. And then, school funding is kind of that the broad range of efforts from policy to actual direct funding. You can see in each of these slides that we'll have some examples of some of our current grantees, so that you're able to see some of the organizations that have been successfully funded under each issue area. For economic opportunity, I mentioned a little bit about what community wealth building means to us in the last slide, but if you want a little bit more detail, we use the definition that was created a number of years ago by the Democracy Collaborative. When you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to click into this definition, and that'll help you understand and realize what the Denver Foundation defines as community wealth building. I want to just emphasize that this isn't for your own interns or your own staffing. This is really for programs that create pathways into workforce opportunities more broadly. And this focus area also does not include financial literacy. And you can see the grantees, some of the grantees in this area as well. For housing and homelessness, we're really looking at folks in the 0 to 30% area median income, so folks in the lowest income band. So typically, we're not looking at home ownership, but looking in the kind of rental space, as well as looking at work with people who are unhoused. This work can focus on statewide advocacy that will impact the Denver metro area. That's actually true for any issue area that we're working in. We want to see an impact in Denver metro, but it's okay if the work is happening on a broader scale. Oh, I'm sorry, this is environment and climate. I'm sorry, I was going into housing. We lean more towards solutions that focus on long-term, but we also understand that short-term support is important. So transitional housing will be considered, but those more permanent solutions will also be considered. And here are some examples of some of these grantees. Okay, now we can go to environment and climate. So in environment and climate, again, statewide is totally fine. We get that the air doesn't stop at the boundaries of Metro Denver. This does not include access to the outdoors or wildlife and land preservation. It really is focused on that renewable energy, energy efficiency, and air quality, those three areas. And importantly, it does not support energy efficiency of your own building as an applicant. So this is not for your own capital upgrades. It would be for programming more broadly related to energy efficiency work. And then in transportation, this is about affordability and accessibility of the public transit system. It does not include bus passes for your own clients or the people that you work with. And it also does not include the purchase of vans or other vehicles. So again, it's not for your own capital. It's for kind of transformation and change and support within the public transit system and connection to the public transit system. So for the eligibility, there are really a couple of things that we think about. One is that you fit into one or more of the priority areas of the Denver Foundation. So those 5 areas that I went over, it'll be important that you touch on how you connect to one or more of those areas. It doesn't matter if it's one or more of those areas. There's no additional points for fitting more areas or less areas. Really importantly, and probably the most important thing that we look at is the alignment with the foundation's core values. And we look at those as racial equity and constituent leadership. We'll ask you several questions related to those areas, and your answers to those will be a really fundamental part of how we decide that your application is a fit. We also look at your financial viability to be able to conduct the work that you're doing within a 1-year period. So we're not looking deeply at your 3-year audited financial statements. We're just looking at, can you do the work in the period of time that you're suggesting you'll do the work in? And very importantly, you need to make sure that you wait 1 full calendar year between applications. So that means that if you applied on March 1st of this year, you should not be applying again in this cycle. You'll need to wait until March 1st of next year. Conversely, if you applied August 1st of 2023, you're welcome to apply again in this cycle. So as I mentioned, we really want you to think about these review criteria, racial equity and constituent leadership. And by constituent leadership, I mean that the people that are being impacted by your work really have a voice and a say in the way that your work is being done, that your programs and services are being done in a way that takes their voice into account and really meets their needs. In terms of alignment with priority areas, we know that your work is likely broader than our priority areas, but we really need you to touch very specifically on how that connection is made, even if you're applying for a general operating grant. So talk specifically about how your work fits within those priority areas. And then again, for financial stability, just making sure that you're ready and able to fulfill the terms of the grant agreement and do your work over the course of this coming year. Our geographic region is the 7-county metro area. So when you're talking about your work, talk to us about how your work is impacting the 7-county metro area. You can be a statewide serving organization or even a national organization. You just need to describe the work that's happening specifically in the Denver metro area. So some common questions we get are, do you fund direct services? Do you fund advocacy? Do you fund community organizing? And the answer is yes. We believe it takes a full range of different types of engagement with community to be able to really impact community change. So any of those ways of interacting are wonderful in the Denver Foundation's book, and we would really love to hear from you if you're engaging in any of those ways. Some other just quick questions are that if you have been applying to other funds at the Denver Foundation, or you plan to apply to other funds at the Denver Foundation, that has no impact on your ability to apply to the Community Grants Program. You're absolutely able to come in and apply for the Community Grants Program and apply for any of our other funding sources as well. And we really encourage you to do that. We want to be able to support you in as many ways as possible. And then if you are planning to submit on behalf of a coalition, please do that. Pick a lead organization and just apply through that lead organization. But we welcome coalition-based applications as well. And now I believe I'm turning it over to Sachi Ishida, who is our Director of Operational Excellence. Sachi?
Thanks, Stacey, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to take you all through how to actually submit your application for the Community Grants Program. So first and foremost, we wanted to show you our funding opportunities pages that you can get to by going to our website, denverfoundation.org. select grants and scholarships in the top ribbon, select funding opportunities, and these are going to be a quick snapshot of all of the open competitive funding opportunities that we have at the foundation. When you first navigate to the page, it's going to default to that status being open, so only funds that are accepting applications right now. If you toggle to the all button, you'll be able to see all of our competitive funds and when they are accepting applications. If you click that Learn More button, it will expand into a page specific to that fund that will give you an overview of the criteria of the fund. On the right side, in the teal box at a glance, it'll give you the basic information about when the application opens and closes, typical grant range, funding areas, kind of important information that you'll need to determine if you want to apply for the program. So that's a great resource for all of our funds. Like Desa mentioned, we encourage you to apply for as many funds as you feel your organization is eligible for. Back here on the denverfoundation.org website, under the Grants and Scholarships ribbon again, you can also click on the Community Grants Program, and then you'll scroll down on the page to register and apply when you are actually ready to go ahead and start applying. All right, so we have a grants portal called TDF Grant Manager that we launched back in 2022. So if your organization has applied or received a competitive grant for us since 2022, you'll already have an account in this new portal. One really important thing about our portal is that as many people from an organization can have an account in TDF Grant Manager, you'll all just be linked to that same organization, which means that multiple people from your organization can work on an application together. You can also save as you go, so no need to feel like you have to get it all in at once. If you do not have an account yet, go ahead and click that Create New Account button. And there are a couple of really wonderful features for grant writers to participate through the collaborator feature, which you can learn more about on our grants FAQ page as well. Once you log in to TDF Grant Manager and you click that Apply button in the top left corner, you will see this page, which will display all of our open competitive funding opportunities. If you are ready to start applying, you can go ahead and click that blue Apply button on the right-hand side, and that will take you to the application. Again, you can start applying, save as you go. There's also going to be a preview button if you're not quite ready to apply yet, but you want to look at the questions, you want to review it again, you can go ahead and use that. There's also an integration with Google Translate. So in the top left, you'll see that Google icon. You can select a different language and it'll translate everything on the page to the language that you select. There is a hard deadline set on all of these applications. So you'll see on the right next to the Apply button, this is for this first cycle. As Desa mentioned, the deadline for this cycle is August 1st at 5 p.m. And after that passes, you will no longer be able to submit your application. So make sure you give yourself enough time on the front end. All right, so what are the actual questions in the application? We're going to break it down into a couple different sections. This first section is about organization information and financials. So we'll ask you for your DBA, your doing business as name, if you have one. We'll ask you for your U.S. section code. A reminder, you must be a 501c3 to receive funding from the Community Grants Program. We'll ask for your organization's mission, your NTEE code that your organization fits within. We'll ask you to verify your address and your CEO or executive director. We'll ask if you're using a fiscal sponsor. We'll ask you for the number of part-time staff or full-time staff. And then we'll ask you those 4 financial questions that Desa mentioned. So what is your fiscal year, the dollar amount for your operating budget, your financial status. So just a little free write space to tell us about anything important related to your financial status currently. And then we'll ask you to upload your annual budget. We'll also just ask if we can share your application with potential donors that might be interested. One really important thing to emphasize for those of you using fiscal sponsors is that we will need the official signed agreement that's signed by both parties, the fiscal sponsor and the fiscal sponsee. And we will need to be able to verify your 501c3 status on the IRS website. So please make sure all of your information is up to date. If we can't verify it on the IRS website, we'll need to either contact you again, or you will not pass our grant due diligence and you'll need to apply for the next round. The next section is about grant details. So we'll ask you what type of grant you are applying for, general operating support or program or project specific. Again, the Community Grants Program has a preference to fund general operating support to give you the most flexibility to use the dollars how you see fit, but obviously it has to fit within the criteria for the Community Grants Program. We'll ask you the amount that you're requesting, which of the TDF priority areas or issue areas your organization fits within. You'll be able to check as many as apply. The county and geographic area served, and then these next 3 questions are open free write questions. So organization overview, your fit with the Community Grants Program priorities, and then success and proudest moments. Then we will ask you a couple core value questions. So we'll ask if your CEO or executive director identifies as BIPOC. We will also ask you for what percentage as an estimate of your staff, board, and client or community identify as BIPOC. And then 2 free write questions, efforts to engage residents, constituents, and client/community in your work. So that constituent-led component Desa mentioned. And then what racial equity means to your organization and how it impacts your work. Another really important note: to be eligible for this round for CGP, as Desa mentioned, if you received a grant for Cycle 2 last year, so Cycle 2 2023, you must submit a final report in TDF Grant Manager to be eligible for this next round. Unlike the applications where as many people from the organization can work on the application together, the final report is only assigned to the person who submitted the application last year. So if that person no longer works at your organization, or you're logging into TDF Grant Manager and you don't see that there, but you know you got a grant from Cycle 2 last year, please reach out to the Denver Foundation. We will reassign that final report to somebody else at your organization, and those are due at the same time these applications are due, so that August 1st deadline. So please make sure you have that submitted in time. And I'm going to hand it back to Desa to finish us out.
Great, thanks, Sachi. So just a little bit on our timeline. The application is open. It opened up on June 14th. We're doing our pre-application information session right as we speak. So you're right there on 6/26. And then just again to emphasize, the application is due on August 1st at 5 p.m. So please allow yourself enough time to get the application completed and ready to submit by that time. We do engage in a review process that takes a couple of months. That process includes the kind of formal due diligence that Sachi was describing, where we review your 501c3 status or your fiscal sponsor. We make sure that you're technically able to apply, that you have your final report in. And then we have a team of community volunteers that read alongside Denver Foundation staff and deliberate together and make decisions about your grant application. That process takes about 2 months. So as you're planning your cash flow and looking at when you think notifications will come, think about mid-October as being the timing for hearing on this particular grant proposal. And then just to give you a sense of the faces and the folks that you can connect with, and just emphasizing that you can connect with any of us. We're all very happy to be in touch with you after this application workshop. So you've met myself, Mara, and Sachi on this call. All 3 of us are available and happy to help. And then these are the other members of our engaged philanthropy team. Zach Clapper, who focuses on our education and housing and homelessness areas. Andrea Schultz, who focuses on our environment and climate and economic opportunity area. Colin Hugh, who focuses on transportation, education, and economic opportunity. And Christine Snyder, who focuses on housing and homelessness and environment and climate. And again, any of us are happy to help. Those areas of focus are probably who you'll be directed to if you come in for office hours. So just so you have a face to put with those names. And these are the email addresses, so you can get in touch with us specifically. If you don't know who you want to get in touch with and you just want to be directed by us to the right person, you can always just send an email to grants@denverfoundation.org and we'll get you to the right spot. All right, and now we're going to go into Q&A.
Thank you so much to Desa and Asachi for giving an overview of this incredible part of the work the Denver Foundation does. We're now pleased to get to your questions, and we've been tracking them throughout the webinar, and we'll get to as many as we can. So thank you so much. The very first question I have here, and this one I think will be for Desa. It says, if my organization does not fit within any of the priorities defined in this grant opportunity, but our work aligns with the foundation's mission, would it be possible to get an appointment with you to discuss other possible funding alignments?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're always happy to talk to organizations doing great work, particularly organizations that are aligned with the values of the Denver Foundation. So please do reach out and we'd be happy to have an individual conversation with you about whether there are other opportunities through our field of interest funds, through our donor advised funds, and other ways. So please do reach out, but don't spend time applying for the community grants program because we really are focused on these particular issue areas for this particular grant opportunity.
Thank you so much. The next question says, what's the estimated timeline for grant funds to be dispersed for successful applications or applications that are approved? I think you might have just been over this, but let's give folks a reminder.
Yeah, so the applications are due on August 1st. It takes us a couple of months to do the review process. So you should expect to hear kind of mid-October is really the timeline.
Great, thank you for that. I see here next, what is the total amount the Denver Foundation will be granting as part of our community grants program?
Each cycle we give out about $2 million, kind of give or take, depending on where our endowment is at any particular time. So it'll be just a little over $2 million for this cycle. Just to give you a sense of how competitive the cycle is, we typically get anywhere from 200 to 275 applications. We typically fund about 50 applications per cycle. So think of it as about a 20% success rate for applications. We could easily fund double that with the number of qualified applications that come in. We're really limited in the amount of resource that we have. So that's, that's just a reality that we all have to keep in mind when we think about the community grants program.
Yeah, thank you for that, Desa. So many incredible organizations in our community doing work that we're aligned with. The next question is, am I able to apply for a strengthening neighborhood grant and use a fiscal sponsor for the bigger grants too?
Let's have a conversation about that. You typically, organizations either are a better fit for strengthening neighborhoods or a better fit for the community grants program. It's not highly common for us to fund at the same time out of strengthening neighborhoods and out of community grants, because community grants is designed to fund organizations that are just a little further along in their life cycle development than strengthening neighborhoods is. So if there were a particular reason for you to be in both buckets, that would be something for us to talk about. But it may be that we just need to decide whether it makes more sense for you to be in strengthening neighborhoods or community grants. So why don't you feel free to reach out to me about that, and we can spend some time talking with David and I and you about what makes the most sense.
Thank you. Now I'm going to move to some questions that look like they have been in some of our specific areas. So let me start under the education area. The first question I have here is, for education, do you accept applications for programs that support youth who are incarcerated or who are in step-down facilities or facility schools?
We're looking at programs that are tied to the public schools. And so in the event that the work you're doing is tied to the public schools and the public school system, then those applications would be accepted. But for other types of educational opportunities, that's not what the community grants program is funding at this time.
Thank you for that. I'll move to another education question here. Would you please clarify if school enrichment programs are covered? It says, we are a Denver arts organization with ambitious racial equity initiatives to remove barriers to the healing power of the arts for K-12 kids and adults who are marginalized. Would this fit within the funding priorities?
We should have this is one that might be a good office hours conversation. We definitely have programs that sound similar to what you're describing that have been funded by the Denver Foundation. It really depends on how much actual school systems are being changed by your work. So if you think about whether school systems are being supplemented by your work or whether the systems themselves are being transformed by your work, that's kind of the dividing line between whether something is a fit for the Denver Foundation or not. So if your work is happening in the schools and the practices of the schools are shifting as a result of your work, then that would be a good fit for the Denver Foundation. If it's bringing a different filter in and giving students an additional experience, then that's not as good of a fit. So feel free to reach out to us for office hours to talk about that one in a little more detail, but hopefully that line gives you a little bit better sense.
Thank you. I'll now jump to a question under the housing priority. For the homelessness priority, will funds be available for supportive services this year? Last year, we were notified that funds were awarded for organizations who managed actual housing rather than support to keep families in current housing situations or helping them find transitional housing.
No, we do fund organizations that are keeping families in housing or are trying to find housing. We fund a number of organizations in those areas. So certainly, eviction, prevention support, housing navigation, all of those things are funded under our housing and homelessness area.
Great, that's very helpful. The next question I have is, can you describe a few more examples of advocacy and organizing type work or type organizations that the Denver Foundation considers for funding?
Sure. I mean, organizations that are doing work in grassroots communities. So, we would want you to be working with people in the community who are directly impacted by an issue. That issue could be in education, it could be in housing, it could be in environment, right? I mean, it could be any of those areas. So, let's take an example of an organization that was listed on the environment and climate slide. Cultivando is an organization that is working with folks up in the Globeville, Elyria, Swansea area who are being impacted in a really strong way by environmental justice impacts through Suncor. And so those neighbors are coming together and are advocating and speaking up to try to change policies and systems and practices related to that environmental pollution. And so we look to organizations that are working deeply with community members to lift up their voices and to create those kinds of systems changes across all of the priority areas that we're working in. So that could be advocating for more affordable transit options. That could be advocating for changes in laws around evictions. That could be advocating for different ways that small businesses are funded and supported through the city. So, so really just looking at that grassroots advocacy effort.
Great, thank you. I'm going to pop back up to another question under the education priority. This one says, we are an independent school, non-public, with a sole focus on access to education and racial and social economic diversity. Independent school with a very public mission. Can we apply, or are we not eligible? It says we are a 501c3.
No, and public schools are the space that we're focused for our education priority area.
Thank you. That's clarifying. The next one says, I'm from the Giving Grocery at the Denver South High School, which is a magnet school in DPS for newcomers and refugees. We have a grocery with cultural appropriate selections for the students to bring home to their families. Would this fall under education, or perhaps economic opportunity? The grocery shopping is done during the school day.
I don't think that would fall under education. The way it would fall under economic opportunity would be if you were creating pathways for employment at the grocery store for members of the community, and had some programming for them to be developing their workforce skills as a part of it, or they owned part of the grocery store. I'm not hearing a really strong fit in that description. But I would need to know just a little bit more about how you were thinking about the economic opportunity component.
Thank you, Desa. I have a feeling most of these questions are coming to you, so thank you for being able to answer all of these with such ease. The next question I have here is, can you explain the connection between K-12 education and racial equity?
Sure. I think in almost every aspect of our society, there are disproportionate impacts to people of color around negative outcomes that are happening. And that's something that's true in our education system as well. You see that in everything from graduation rates to suspensions and expulsions, really, any area where you're seeing and more negative outcomes are happening in a disproportionate way to people of color. And so in schools, we're really looking for ways to even the playing field and make sure that students have as much access to opportunity as possible. And so that's really about eliminating the systemic barriers that exist, the racist barriers that exist in our institutional systems, and really giving that access to that group of students.
Thank you. The next question I have here is under the transportation section. Could you discuss more about transportation accessibility, how our organization could apply with a less broad approach, bus passes, for example?
So transportation accessibility, I think, has to do with both affordability, like you're talking about. So it might be how people are able to to afford to get on transit and use transit, as opposed to having to choose between buying their medication for the week and buying a bus pass, or buying lunch for the day, or buying a bus ticket. But it could also have to do with the physical access to transportation. So there's a lot of folks that can't get to a bus stop or a light rail stop. Bus stops and light rail stops are not within, a close proximity to where they're coming from or going to. There are infrastructure issues. There's no sidewalks. There's no, kind of places to bike. There's just not opportunity to be able to get to the transit in a really like visceral physical sense. And so I think we're looking at all of those things when we think about transportation, accessibility and affordability. So things in that full range. So if you were talking about getting bus passes into the hands of lots of people, that's something that would be covered under our transportation area. If you were talking about us giving you a grant to buy 50 bus passes just to hand out, that wouldn't be the same. So it's again that more systemic view in the transit space.
That's great. The next question I have is sort of a general one. Do you fund legal services?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, this one is a little bit more technical, but it says if an organization applied for the full amount, the 50K, does the Denver Foundation make decisions on that sole amount, or does the foundation ever come back to an organization and propose to fund the application at a lower amount?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. The Denver Foundation frequently is not able to fund at the full asked amount. I would say, 90% of people ask for the $50,000, and that makes perfect sense. But we don't have the ability to fund, just given the numbers that I gave you earlier, at that full amount. So we have a formula that we use, that we work through once we see who the applicants are. And we try to fund as close to full funding as possible, but frequently have to come back with a lower level of funding. So you may ask for $50,000 and only get $40,000, or if you ask for 25, you'll probably get 25. So we try to balance it out and do as close to full funding as possible.
Yeah, thank you for that. My next question is under the housing priority area. Would purchasing land or housing to create cooperatives fall under the economic opportunity, or housing, or both? Or I might say in this case, DESA, or either. Does that fit within the priorities?
It does fit. I would put that, you could put it in either. It doesn't matter. It would fit under housing clearly. It also fits under economic opportunity, though we think of economic opportunity as more related to work. But just to give you a little bit more insight into how we think about these issue areas, there's no kind of one bucket for housing, one bucket for environment, one bucket for economic opportunity. It's a big bucket of funding, and we're just looking at the most competitive applications. So there's not any advantage to being in more or less, or one area or another area. It's all thought of together. So those check marks are more for our tracking purposes over time, so we can see where are we funding, who are we funding, how are we funding. So don't stress too much about what you're checking in terms of what you fit. You'll get to the right place with us.
Thank you. My next question is in the education area. Can we be funded for educating navigators? And who should I contact to apply?
Navigators are a great thing to be funded for. You could apply for that under the community grants program, depending on kind of how far along you are. If you're kind of newly starting into navigation, that might be a good strengthening neighborhoods fit. We talked about that program earlier. That program is really designed for either folks who have a really great idea, like they're ready to get into navigation and they're just kind of starting out, and it's just a group of people in a neighborhood kind of trying to do good in their community, or for newer organizations that are starting to grow but aren't quite big enough for the community grants program yet. So if you think you fit into that bucket, we should talk about strengthening neighborhoods. David Portillo is the person that runs that program. I'm happy to connect you to him. If you feel like you're a little bit further along and kind of a more established organization looking to start a navigation program, we could talk about that as well. But navigation is definitely something that the Denver Foundation supports.
Thank you. The next question comes under the economic opportunity priority area. Would the Denver Foundation consider supporting work to connect job seekers to workforce development opportunities, or only organizations providing direct services? I'm in public media and we have amazing platforms to reach Coloradans, but it's our partners who provide direct services like training and upskilling.
It's a really good question. I had somebody come through my office the other day that was also asking about our funding for media. That's kind of an untested area for us. We haven't really gone through the process of considering a media application before. So I can't say for certain where our committee would come down on that. I think if there was enough of a direct connection, right, you could say, our information directly connected these people to these services. I think that would be a solid argument. I also think if it's kind of like we're getting the message out very broadly and people may or may not be kind of taking in the message, that would be a little bit harder for our committee to, to absorb. So that's one that I don't have a good answer for because we just haven't tested it yet.
That's great. The next question is, it says, given mentoring is not eligible for education under CGP, is diverse approaches and expanding behavioral health services or therapy eligible?
Again, I think it's about whether you're looking at changing the systems within the school or whether you're looking at providing services to individual students that supplement their educational experience. So if it's about changing the system around, again, through a racial equity lens, how behavioral health services are provided within the school, then that's a great fit. If it's about providing supplemental services to what's being offered in the school, then that's a less great fit for the education area.
And speaking in the education area, are public charter schools, those part of DPS, eligible for CGP?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. All right, let's see what other questions are coming in here. This one is also under the education priority area. When funding programs within public education, are you looking for specific programs to implement into schools, or would you potentially fund an organization that has the skills, knowledge, and expertise to provide professional development, capacity building, sustainability planning, and technical assistance in a framework really encouraging local school level data to identify specific needs and gaps within that school and community?
That's a very specific question. I feel like we would fund organizations that were providing capacity and skill building and technical assistance. I don't know that the data collection component would be the most resonant with the community grants program. I think it would be what happens with the data after that. So if the data came back and said, your teachers need additional supports in these ways to engage in more racially equitable practices in the school, and you were providing technical assistance and capacity building support around that, I think that's where the community grants program would best come in.
Thank you. The next question, and this one may be for Sachi. It says, what do you look for in the financials? Ratio for program to admin costs, reserves? What are we looking for there?
That's a better Desa question, actually. So I'm gonna.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
We're looking at your basic financial health. So we kind of take a totally different approach to financials than I think really any other foundation. We give you the opportunity to tell us in a free write section the important things that we need to know about your financials. So if you're doing really well and you want to tell us about that, we want to hear about that. If you had a tough year last year, but there's a reason that you had a tough year and you want to tell us about that, that's great. Our biggest concern is, can you do the work that you said that you're going to do in the year that you're going to do it? So do you have the basic financial sustainability to get the work done over this 12-month period? Because it's really hard for us when we give you a grant. If you go under in the year that we've given you the grant, we have to worry about getting the grant back and kind of trying to figure that out. And we don't want that to happen. But we're not kind of judging your long-term financial sustainability. We're not looking at every piece of your history. We're not needing all of your cash flow projections. We're really just looking at, can you do the work that you say you're going to do? So it's a pretty open bar for how we think about financials. And we found that that has really given us the ability to meet some of our own goals around funding more grassroots organizations that might not otherwise have had access to the community grants program before.
That's great. Here's some questions under the eligibility section, and it says, can orgs apply to more than one funding opportunity? And can we apply for 2 grants, one in the education priority area and one in the economics area?
You want me to just keep going, Sachi? Okay. Yes, you can apply for more than one grant in different buckets. So you could apply for the Community Grants Program and the LAO Fund, or the Community Grants Program and the Greenwood Fund. You could apply in those 2 buckets. You cannot apply for more than one grant under the Community Grants Program itself. So if you fit into education and economic opportunity, just check both of those boxes on your application, and we'll be able to see that you fit in both of those boxes, but don't submit 2 different grant proposals.
Great, thank you. The next question is, would a new program that doesn't have tangible outcomes yet be considered? Should projects be existing already, or are you open to new or pilot programs?
That's a great question. If it's a brand new program that's just in a conceptual phase, we tend to push those off until they've had a little bit of time to germinate and marinate a bit. We do fund pretty new programs though. So if you've been doing the work for a year or a couple of years and you're still a new program without a lot of defined outcomes, that's okay with us. We're willing to take risks on organizations, but if it's still in the conceptual stage, that's still a little too early for us.
Great, that's helpful. The next question I has is, we are a newer 501c3 that has an EIN, but our C3 status is pending. Does the pending status disqualify us from applying if it's not approved by the August 1st deadline?
That's a Sachi question.
Yes, that's correct. You will need your full 501c3 status by the time the application closes, because we'll go right into grant due diligence and you'll be disqualified if you don't have that 501c3 status by then.
Thank you. Which gets to the next one, which is about fiscal sponsorship. So can we be a fiscal sponsor for multiple community leaders currently submitting their 501c3s that are doing different work in the community and apply for a community grant with different priority areas as a nonprofit fiscal sponsor? So I think they're trying to ask, can they be a fiscal sponsor for multiple groups that are applying?
Yes, you definitely can be a fiscal sponsor for multiple organizations. Just make sure that those organizations are creating their own record in the grants portal, and they will enter in your information as the fiscal sponsor as part of their application, and then we'll do some work on the back end. But yes, you can work with as many organizations as you have a formal agreement with.
Fantastic. Okay. So my next question is, if an org is still completing their 2023 or 2022 audit, where are they still eligible to apply for the August 1st deadline?
Yes, we will not ask you for your fully executed audit. If you want to write that information into the financial status free write question that we have, that's a perfect example of just giving us a heads up of what's going on with your organization.
Thank you. All right. I think we are running out of time for questions. Let me try to get to one more. And the last question that I'm going to be able to get to here, I think, is a good one to move us into our next section, which is, can you clarify office hour opportunities and when those are? Are those meetings that you hold individually with folks who reach out to you? And what is the best way to connect?
Yes. We do hold them individually. They're short, like 20-minute sessions that are an opportunity for you to talk with our engaged philanthropy team about your proposal and what you're thinking, and they'll help give you some guidance about whether whether it seems like a good fit, how you might strengthen the proposal to make it a little more resonant for our committee. So they'll give you kind of insights into that. To be able to secure an office hour, just go ahead and reach out to that grants@denverfoundation.org email address, and we'll get you to the right place. You also can look in the PowerPoint and just reach out directly to the different engaged philanthropy officers that are assigned to the issue area that you're associated with. If you're interested in doing that, either of those will get you to the same place. And then there's just an online, an easy little online system that allows you to kind of schedule a time with our engaged philanthropy officers. They have kind of set office hours that they'll meet with you. So encourage anyone who's interested to do that. It's a good way to just get a little additional support.
Thank you so much, Desa and Sachi. And thank you for all your wonderful questions today. As Desa mentioned, it's our team here, the Engaged Philanthropy team, that will be following up. So if you do have additional questions, reach out to us at grants@denverfoundation.org, and we'll make sure that you have a chance to speak to one of our team members about this incredible opportunity. And I just want to thank everybody for coming to join us today. As Desa mentioned, it is a competitive process, but we are incredibly grateful for all the great work that each and every one of you are doing to make our Denver metro area, an incredible, equitable, beautiful place to live, work, and play. So we're glad to have you here. Just as a final reminder, the recording of today's session and the slides in both English and Spanish will be sent up as a follow-up. We will also have our recording posted on the website. So if you have colleagues or team members that weren't able to join today, you'll be able to log in to see this video again. And a final reminder is that the application window closes on August 1st, right at 5 p.m. So please make sure to plan to get those applications in before that 5 p.m. cutoff. And I just want to thank you, everyone. Thanks everyone on our team at the Denver Foundation for putting this together. Our incredible events team led by Trinice and others, and members of my team that have been in the background here helping to make sure that all your questions are brought to the forefront and answered today. So please be in touch with us, and thank you again for your partnership with the Denver Foundation. We look forward to working with you, and have a great day, everyone. Thanks for joining us.